How's it going, everybody? This is the Uncanny Omar from Near Mint Condition, and it is my absolute pleasure today to get to talk about this amazing release, the Web of Horror, the complete Web of Horror, with one of the people, maybe even the main person that helped put it all together. Dana, how are you? Introduce yourself. Who are you? What do you do?
Hello, I'm Dana Andra, and this was my labor of love, the Web of Horror. I spent 10 years putting this book together. Before that, I wrote for the Comics Journal and Comic Book Marketplace, and a little bit for Alter Ego. Is that on your end? That music?
Made it good.
Wait a minute.
It's okay.
Hold on. Is that me?
I just muted you, so it's coming out of your end. It's okay. I've done this before. I've had this happen to me before, where You're okay. You're okay. I had something running in the background I forgot about, and then all of a sudden I'm conducting an interview, and I hear a sound, and I was like, "Oh, that's embarrassing. That's me."
All right. Anyway, so yeah, I used to write for the Comics Journal and a little bit for a couple of things for Alter Ego, and I wrote about music and films and things at different points. But most of the time, I've just been trying to get. I've had a sporadic career in comics.
How did that even begin for you? Like how was it that you got connected to comics? And yeah, I this is kind of what I love talking about is like not only the behind the scenes of a certain project, but just you and your career in comics and how it even began when you were little. Were you like a big fan of comic books growing up, horror comics, or what took you to this route?
It really started with monsters,
Mm-hmm.
like in the early '60s.
Okay.
And there was a kid across the street, and he had a whole. I had never seen these, but he had these old famous monsters magazines.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Like from the '60s. and I just went apeshit for these. They were just fantastic. I thought, what? And he had all the Aurora monster models, and he had Castle films, 8mm film, monster films, and he had the whole monster gamut going on. And he was a bit older, but he had all this stuff, and so I got hooked on that. And so my first two comics that I had were these two, Frankenstein and The Creature from the Black Lagoon. These two Dell comics are kind of gone down it. These two Dell comics were classic comics back in the day, and I still have them. It's hard to know which way the camera's going, but
so you actually kept those?
Oh well, you know what? These I think I kept the Frankenstein because certain things are too hard to not keep. You can't sell them because it's just like a part of your soul goes away.
Oh, I there are things I've had to sell in my life, just going through some hard points, and there are things that I can't let go. So I completely understand. There are parts.
Original art is like that for me, and the good thing about buying original art is that you can, when you need money, it's often worth money. Like a nice piece of change if you need to sell it. But so I've sold some great original art, but certain comics you just can't get rid of. And I also, so this was another big one for me as a kid. I had this one and I loved it, just the cover of it, because it was a giant red ant. I loved that about it. But again, it was just the monsters that got me into it. And so the monster magazines led to the monster comics. And then I was into that for a while. And then Batman, the TV show, came along.
Oh yeah.
And I went nuts for Batman. and I'm still a huge fan. And for some reason, it took me a bit longer, about another 6 months to get into Marvel. This is my first big Marvel that I had.
Amazing spot. Oh, you still now? Is that your original copy, the one that you got? Okay.
No, I wish it was, but I bought this off a spinner rack at the drugstore outside my school. Well, I mean back then, and I just said, and I was like, "What the hell? This is amazing!"
No
and
pun intended.
I was hooked forever. So that's how I got into comics. It was through Monsters, and then Batman and Spider-Man.
So it was a segue, if you will. I kind of see all of it like working together, right? Like usually people that are into, I find this the older I get, like I missed out on this particular area of comics and like what is it now? Like wrestling. I used to watch wrestling when I was a kid, and a lot of my viewers are like, "Oh man, wrestling is still awesome," and they read comics. So I see a lot of the connections there, and I see that a lot with horror. Like either comics got them in the horror movies, or even like the model building, or vice versa. Horror movies kind of led people into comic books because of just wonderful magazines that we used to have, and nowadays they've gotten, because of collected editions, have made an amazing comeback. So much so, like, I mean, we've had most of the Warren stuff reprinted. The East, oh my gosh, Gemstone started that way ahead of time, before hardly anybody else was doing those kind of collected editions with the EC library.
Yeah.
And
well, I was getting the EC portfolios back when those started.
Did you get the EC annuals, the reprints with the colors?
Yeah, I did get those, but I got in on the ground floor with all the Russ Cochran stuff.
Yeah, those are beautiful.
And he was doing those big portfolio size original art. He was like doing the first original artist editions of EC stories. He did 6 of those, and I had those. But
so horror and comics have been a part of your life, and then you started writing for the Comics Journal.
And then what happened was then fanzines came into my life. This is my very first fanzine.
Okay.
And again, it's not this, or it may be the actual first one I had that I got. It's maybe the actual copy, but this is the Rockets Blast Comic Collector, RBCC. And this is a fanzine that was full of ads for other fanzines. Like, for example, this is a fanzine that Gary Groth did. Fantastic fanzine. But there were tons of fanzines. So I was at that point then nuts for fanzines. And that's where fandom really was in those fanzines.
When you say fandom, what do you mean by fandom? That's where like
we
comic book nerds were hanging out with the fanzines.
That's where you could buy back issues, and that's where you can meet other fans, and that's where you could see ads for comic conventions, and that was before the internet and before the buyer's guide came along. That was where fandom kind of congregated.
I love that. I love hearing this. I was a big fan of course, comic book history, but also like the movement that helped, with conventions before they were really big conventions and people meeting up. So when you mentioned like original art, there's all these amazing stories of artists that used to have all these, or sometimes the inkers that would have these original pieces and had no idea how much these things were worth. Then you hear stories of like editors and things like that. So nowadays, I mean, because of the internet, it's more accessible, right? Like normal people can be in their living room and bid on these things. But also, oh my gosh, the astronomical prices on some of this original art, it's insane these days.
I went to 1972, 73, 74 New York Comic Con. And I bought a original drawing by Bernie Wrightson for $50. It was an amazing pen drawing, or actually more like brushed illustration of an axe fight. It's fantastic. And it was $50. And then when I last saw it for sale, it was like $5,000.
It's because you had sold it at one time.
I sold it ages ago. Yeah.
Oh man, yeah. You got to do what you got to do. I understand.
Although I do have a Michael Kaluta piece that I bought at that same con, I still have.
Still have that?
Yeah.
And you never know with these things. Like, I mean, there was a time when comic books weren't really what they are now, like as far as value. It seems like every day nowadays, well, especially, I mean, you saw it in the 90s, right? In the 90s, it was like everybody that wasn't collecting or reading comics was coming to the comic book stores, going to the grocery stores, the pharmacies, as you recalled, and buying all the number ones. You had new companies that were starting up like Image, so they all had to buy the number ones, the number twos, the special covers, the variant covers, the special mail away covers, because everybody thought they were going to get rich. It was like, and the same thing. I mean, it's not just comics alone, right? But we do focus on comics on the channel. Baseball cards did the same thing. It was a huge implosion of baseball cards because everybody thought they were going to get rich. Oh, I can buy this pack of baseball cards for like $1.99 later on, $1.50. And I can sell one of the cards in that pack for $8. This is better than playing the stock market. And now that, with the introduction of like CGC and things like that, people have made a business out of selling just single issues. That we forget there was a time where there was no buyer's guide. There was no like people like setting prices for things. Like comic book stores weren't that huge of a thing unless you live in bigger cities.
But like there were sellers and there were like ads in Marvel Comics for people that sold comics, and that's where you went. That's where you got back issues, or secondhand bookstores. That was a big thing back in the 60s too.
Now, I told you this behind the scenes, but this has been one of my favorite releases this year. Every year I do a top 10 reads and top 10 like favorite collected editions, and I don't know what category this belongs in because I've never read any of the stories in here. But the amount of love that went into this book is just impressive. So now I want to know how something like this got even started. You said one more time for the people that just got here live.
10 years. I worked on it.
10 years of your life. Okay. Talk to me about that. When did the idea start and why?
What I did first was I wrote an essay in the hardcover edition of the Warren Companion.
Okay.
About Web of Horror.
Okay.
And it's only in the hardcover one. It's not in the softback. But
hardcovers, that's where it's at.
Can I mute this while I'm?
Absolutely, yes.
I had to cough.
It's okay.
And so, yeah, I wrote that, and that was back in 2001. And so I thought, so when Dark Horse started doing its Warren Archives, I thought, maybe there should be a Web of Horror archive because there's all this unpublished stuff that was in fanzines, but it's basically still unpublished. And so around 2015, was it 2013? Maybe 2013. I had adapted a graphic novel. I had done a novel to comics, and it was Freaks of More by Tom DeHaven. I had adapted it to comics. And so this came out like in the 90s. I mean, the actual issues came out in the 90s. This edition, this collected edition came out in 2013 or so.
Well, who's the publisher on that collected edition?
Dark Horse.
Dark Horse, okay.
Dark Horse put out the individual issues, and then they collected it in 2013. Okay. And so then I thought, okay, I'm back acquainted with the current Dark Horse people. I'm gonna pitch this Web of Horror book to them.
And when did you first encounter Web of Horror? Like, how did you know? Because that was the thing about this book, and I love finding things out about these like particular stories. I had no idea.
1969. That's when I encountered it.
I love it. Okay, 1969. What did you see? What did you find?
I went into the newsstand. And this
Okay.
is my actual issue. This is what I bought.
I'm gonna highlight you again, Dana.
This is my original issue of Web of Horror #1 that I bought at a newsstand in Coral Gables, Florida.
Uh-huh. How did you keep that in such good shape?
Oh well, it's kind of because that's how I am, you know.
I've had
but this is one of my lesser copies. It's kind of got the spines kind of torn, but
okay. I'm not here to grade it or judge it. I was just like impressed that you've had it that long. Okay, so you found this,
and this is and this is what I scanned the book from. So, but so I was already buying Castle of Frankenstein. It was a monster magazine. I was buying Creepy and Eerie, and Vampirella had just started coming out. So I was, and also paperbacks had covers by Frank Frazetta and Jeff Jones, etc.
Yes.
And so I picked this up, and I go, "Ooh, that's a Jeff Jones cover."
So you knew your artist back then?
Oh yeah,
I would have been like, "That's Frank Frazetta." Like I think I said that when you sent me the. You're like, "Hey, I'm doing this book," and I'm like, "Oh, cool, it's a Frank Frazetta cover." But go on.
But so, and I was already into the fanzines. And so the fanzines that I had seen at that point were like Graphic Showcase, which had one of Wrightson's very first stories in it. Graphic Showcase #2.
Okay.
Had Uncle Bill's Barrel, which was a classic first Wrightson story, which is just, it's amazing. It's like these gray washes, but also these EC fanzines. So like Squadron #3.
Where were you finding these?
I would either get them from other fans, because the publisher of Rocket's Blast lived in Miami. So I joined the comic book club. That's where I got all this stuff, was at this comic book club where GB Love and Andy Warner and different folks who formed a club. And they said, oh, there were these things called fanzines. I said, well, what the heck is that? And this is what I got. But so, and then there was also Spafon, which also was another EC fanzine.
You know what? We don't have to talk about Web of Horror. I could just sit here and look at your collection. This is a lot of fun. Okay, what is this one?
This is Spafon. There were 5 issues of it, and that is that Frazetta cover.
Okay, okay. That is a Frazetta.
Yeah,
I have never heard of this.
And on the back, there's a Wrightson illustration on the back. There's Wrightson area. But there's a bunch of Wrightson in here. Steve Hickman, Mike.
Now, could you please explain for people that don't know what a fanzine is? In case
a fanzine is basically it's fans had they would publish their own magazine, and they were called fanzines because it was just a fan would create a magazine with the arts and the cover and the stories and whatever they could manage. And some people like Jerry Wiest, who did Squatron, would do this gorgeous fans. This is one of the best fanzines ever published, and it's gorgeous. And so was Spafon. Spafon was a fat, beautiful production, but it was just fans would edit and publish their own fanzines. Gary Groth got his start publishing fanzines.
Yeah.
Gary Groth at Fantagraphics. Fantagraphics basically grew out of fanzines. And so I had seen these guys, Wrightson and Cluda and Jones in fanzine. I saw Jeff Jones was on paperback book covers. And then I got this. And then I started looking through it. And there's Bernie Wrightson, and there's Ralph Reese, and there's this guy, Wayne Howard, who I think I probably seen by then in Charlton Comics. But there was I open it, and this is what you see. And it was way better in my mind's eye than what we were getting in Creepy and Eerie. And it had just this feeling about it of just being more organic, more fun, more closer to the bone, but not cheesy like the Tales from the Tomb and whatnot that was coming out back then. So I saw that at the newsstand, and I was just stricken. I mean, I was just not stricken, but I was. It was love at first sight, if you want to call it. Yeah.
I will say this about the material in this collection. Um, it surprised the hell out of me just how it's aged beautifully. Because I mean, you much like a lot of the Warren stuff, you know, even though this is it's called the Web of Horror. There's still, I want to say, like fantasy elements in here and sci-fi elements in here as well.
Yeah.
With that little dash of horror that I love so much in my stories. I was just taken back a little bit as to how well a lot of the stories in here have aged. Because I mean, if you look back at even Warren magazines, like some of those later issues, or I'm looking at the archives because I never had the original magazines, but those later archives of eerie and creepy, I think after the whole European invasion and the Spanish invasion of all those horror classics, it kind of became almost like, okay, we'll put some humor in here. We'll put lots more humor into these magazines and less horror because it seems to be selling better. And I think that might have been the mentality behind that movement. Like, let's focus more on the scary yet comical side of things and less on the body horror or shock horror or whatever they were trying to do at the beginning, or they were succeeding at the beginning. Whereas this really felt, I think you said it, it's gritty. I like it. Oh, it was a huge surprise. So how did you pitch this at one time to Dark Horse? Because you said 10 years ago, so that's when Dark Horse, right around the time after Gemstone had stopped publishing the EC archives and Dark Horse has started focusing on the Warren stuff. That seems to me like a perfect fit. Like, it's not much of a collection.
That's what I thought as well. I thought this is a perfect fit. So I pitched it to them, and they basically just said, "Yeah, sounds good. Let's do it."
Okay.
So we started. I mean, I had a lot of it done. I had most of it done. I had articles I had my article that I had rewritten, and had articles by the editors of the fanzines that published the unpublished stories, which were there were two fanzines that published the unpublished stories, and that was Reality and Scream Door and Reality and I'll Be Damned were, again, more fanzines, but they got a hold of unpublished material. This is Reality that had some Web of Horror stories in it that after the magazine died. And this is another one, Scream Door, with a Wrightson cover. And so Robert Gerson, who published Reality, and Robert Lewis, who published Scream Door, and worked with Mark Feldman on I'll Be Damned and Scream Door, they wrote essays for the book.
Okay.
So I had that from the beginning. And then I think Steve Ringenberg volunteered to write the bios. I might have asked him, but he might have said, "Can I do it?" Either way, I definitely was honored to have him do that. And I forget how Richard Arndt wrote the afterword, but I think I probably asked him to. But anyway, so Dark Horse said yes. And as I was doing the project, I knew I had to pay these people something. We can't just reprint all this stuff. So I offered him a small page rate, basically. That was, if you wrote and drew the story, it was a given amount. Then if you only drew it, it's half that amount, or only wrote it half that amount. But it still added up to a few $1,000s, basically like $7,000 actually. So Dark Horse said, that's kind of a lot. And because I don't think they normally pay that much up front for these kind of archives to print them. So they eventually said they didn't want to, and they had it solicited. It was on Amazon. And they said, no, we're not going to. And I think at that time I had said, look, I'll do a Kickstarter for the money. and they didn't seem that like they were down with that. That didn't convince them. So that kind of just ended the Dark Horse thing.
Oh, that's heartbreaking. So yeah, for a lot of people that don't know, and I also did not know these things, just how much money it goes into making some of these products, and it's not as easy as like, hey, I have the perfect idea for a collection. Not everybody's Marvel, not everybody's DC Comics when it comes to collected editions. It takes a lot of time and effort, and unfortunately, money sometimes, and just a lot of personal money too that you have to put in with the hopes this book gets made and is a success. Um, so Dark Horse said no. What do you remember how long ago that was after working on it for so long?
It was like 2016, 20, something like that. It was a couple. It
So a
was
couple years after working on the book.
hmm And so I was, of course, bummed, and I was, but I thought, okay, well, there are other publishers, and right around that time, around 2016, I moved to England. I married my wife over here in England and bought a house here. And then I thought, oh, well, I'll try Titan because Titan's over here.
Hey,
They're right,
yeah, right.
they're right down there in London and everything. So Titan said, yeah, this this looks good. Let's
And you
do
had
it.
already seen some of, and you had already done some of the work, right? And you're like, yeah, this looks good. Okay, what happened there?
So the book was all done, and again we hit the stumbling block of the money. And so and they were more open to the crowdfund aspect than Dark Horse was.
Okay, nice. It's a good start.
And so I made a video. I used to work at CNET back in the early 2000s I used to produce videos. So I made a video for the crowdfund showing the book and the pages and cool music and whatnot. And they thought, yeah, we don't really like the video. They didn't like the video. So they really just kind of just closed the door.
Wait, because of the video?
I kind of got that feeling, was like, we don't want to get this caught up in whatever this is going to be. So I don't want to, I don't want to speak ill of anybody, but it was like we were talking and then we weren't. So
That's okay.
that
Wow.
was it.
Okay, what year was that when they passed?
I'd have to look, but it was probably like, it was before COVID. It was probably like 2017.
Okay, so
something like that.
Year or two after. Oh no, wait. Yeah, about a year or two after Dark Horse had passed. Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So at that point,
so I'm like, God damn it.
you put a lot of time and work into this already.
I was like, God damn it. Like, this is a good book. What the hell? But they didn't want to pay what it costs. But I thought, yeah, but we can do a crowdfund. It'll get the word out and everything. And so I did what I should have done in the first place, because I knew Gary Groth from working for Fantagraphics, from writing for Comics Journal. And Gary's a good guy, always has been good by me. And so I sent him the PDF I had, and he loved the essay part of it. That's kind of what sold it to him. I mean, he liked the magazine and the art and everything.
But it was the essays, huh?
It was the history that kind of.
I love that stuff too. Okay.
Yeah, because I do remember him saying, I really like this history part of it. It really is a solid book. Yeah, let's do it. And he was totally down with the crowdfund thing. He was down with putting up 100 copies to donate to the crowdfund. Wow. He was either he might have thought of the slipcase idea.
Yeah, that was exclusive through the
well, you could
right.
Everybody who got it through the crowdfund, which was Indiegogo, got a slipcase edition. There were 100 of those, gotcha. And then Fantagraphics printed 150 more of their own.
Well, Dana, I don't know if you keep up with stats or numbers or anything, but a lot of our viewers, like our buddy James over here, talking about sold out on CGM, but you can still buy it off of Amazon, and apparently it's done really well.
Yeah, I think it has, because Fantagraphics sold out of it, and I think I did notice that it was out at Cheap Graphic Novels,
And
but Bud Plant has a few copies left.
Mhm.
But for those who haven't seen the slipcase edition, which was designed by Justin Allen Spencer,
oh yes, please hold that up. Let me.
this is fantastic. I love what he did with this.
I love that font. That is absolutely stunning. Oh, whoa, and not Frazetta art in the slipcase too.
No, that's also Jeff Jones.
Yeah.
From number 2.
Wow.
Number 2.
Now the book itself is the same, right? It's just the slipcase.
The book itself is the same, and there's a signed book plate by Mike Kaluta inside.
Oh, beautiful, beautiful.
He signed it.
Now, this is the one that was available through the Indiegogo, and it was the one that Fantagraphics ended up printing a little bit more of, right?
And they still have some, by the way.
Oh, that's good to know. Okay.
So
There you go.
Some of those, they still have some. But it's a lovely slipcase. I really think it's fantastic.
So with you contacting Gary.
So I contacted Gary. Gary this was before COVID happened.
Mm-hmm.
And I forget why COVID slowed anything down, but it kind of did. But I did a whole new video, and I did a Indiegogo, and I had to do Indiegogo because I'm in the UK and I have to use an American bank, blah blah blah. So I used Indiegogo versus Kickstarter,
Mm-hmm.
but it did well, and we sold T-shirts and we sold postcard portfolios. And
How did you spread the word of something like this?
mostly on Facebook.
So
Because
Facebook groups that are about horror comics,
horror comics, EC
Bernie
comics,
Wrightson.
any of the groups with like Bernie Wrightson, Mike Kaluta, horror comics and magazines. There were like 16 different pages that I would share things on, and still people were like, "I never heard about this coming out." Well, it's been all over Facebook, but we sold out of the book, so on the Indiegogo. So that was the important thing. We made the money.
That is amazing. You should be so proud of yourself, and try to hold back the "I told you so's."
Well, one I'm proud of is that I sold this book 3 times.
Right, like the idea is there. It sold itself. It's just when it comes to for some reason, well, money makes sense, right? But the video, that's the one that cracks me up. I wonder what. Okay, whatever. So how long did this series go? Because there's something amazing that is. I don't even want to say it's towards the end of the book itself. Because before we talk about the lost pages, I wanted to talk about how long did this magazine go on?
3 issues.
Okay. So in your 3rd issue, this is really cool. This shows you just how much love and care went to making this book. So this is issue 3. I think it's this one here, the Wrightson cover, if I'm not mistaken.
Right? Yeah, that's number 3.
And then you have this.
Yeah, that was in Scream Door.
Okay.
They had that. Somebody bought it in an auction. I think it was Robert Lewis.
Mm-hmm.
He bought that.
So it's an original Wrightson piece that was supposed to be the cover.
That's a photostat. That was going to be the cover. So yeah. that painting is lost. We don't know where it is.
Damn, that's so sad. Because I wanted to ask about like the quality, and because the scans and so that's the other thing about this book when it comes to reconstruction of like cleaning up the art, and oh my gosh, it is amazing how good it looks. And I'm so glad it's printed in this. Well, you probably know more about the paper stock than I do.
Well, Gary and I totally were on the same mind about the kind of paper and to do the covers on a
Yep,
glossy
I
stock,
like that. Yeah.
and to make the other paper be like a matte paper, like the magazine would have been.
Mhm.
And so it feels kind of. I mean, it was a pulp magazine paper for the magazine, but this is a bit nicer. But it still has that sense of being glossy paper for the cover and then matte for
Yeah. Well, and the art really stands out, like, the black and white artwork.
Yep.
And there's
it really
there is
does.
some absolutely stunning artwork in here too. Absolutely stunning artwork in here that makes me wish there was more of this.
I do
So
too.
tell me about this now. That this is what I found most interesting, because I have a lot of the stories in here I really enjoyed. But tell me about this Lost Pages.
The lost pages were part of what came onto Heritage Auctions as the Cracked Vault. Art from the Cracked Vault. It was when Robert Sproul and major magazines
Mhm.
published Web of Horror. They're famous. They're most famous for Cracked magazine.
Yeah. Okay.
And so there's a whole story about Bruce Jones and Bernie Wrightson trying to keep the magazine going. Meanwhile, Robert Sproul is moving everything down to Florida. And Wrightson and Jones come back to the office wanting to show what they've done to Sproul, and the offices are empty because they've moved to Florida. That's when they finally just say, you know what, screw this. We can't keep doing this.
Right.
And so Frank Brunner, before they managed to move away, Frank Brunner was the one who said he had to go check on some of the art and touch it up or some other blah, blah. He had a story that he told to whoever was in the office, and he got as much of the art as he could, and he gave it back to all the artists who it belonged to, and that includes that was some of his stories, some Kaluta stuff, Wrightson story, Out on a Limb. That was one of them.
Yeah.
All
The
the
monsters that's a Wrightson story. So these were done.
all the number 4 stuff was what Brunner grabbed, but then the lost pages were stories that we had heard about, like Monster Jar. We heard about that. We knew it existed. Wrightson mentioned it every now and then in an interview. I think
This is crazy. Like, so nobody had seen this stuff. Well, since the magazine ended, right? And the magazine ended
well in 1970.
70, right? Okay, so if it was 70 and these weren't uncovered, oh my gosh, you're looking at 40 plus years, 45.
Yeah, they were in a storage. They were in a garage or in a storage this space or something.
Can you imagine finding these things?
And then when Robert Sproul passed away, his son Billy Sproul put all this stuff onto Heritage, and they called it the Cracked Vault. And then we're all like, "Oh my God, the Monster Jar! Are you kidding?" And like I said in the book, there was like a collective holy shit that went across all of collectors' fandom. Everybody who knew about this was like, "Oh my God." And so the artists ended up getting, so the artists and their families ended up getting a cut of those sales, which is nice.
In what, I'm sorry, what year was this? 2014?
This was like 20, was it 2016? Maybe
So, oh my
2016.
goodness. So it was like right before Bernie passed away, right? Because I remember him and
No, he had already passed away. So
when he passed away the same year that Len Wein did. So it must have been 2017.
Yeah.
It's crazy. Oh, so he had passed away not knowing that they were uncovering.
Yeah.
A shame.
The last I talked to him was when I interviewed him for the Warren Companion article. So I never even spoke to him about this book at all. Although Michael Kaluta is still with us, him I've been in touch with quite a bit, and he did a lot for the crowd fund. But so this art turned up, and But of course, when things turn up on Heritage, you don't know who buys them, and they're very protective of that information. So the people who bought it, David Odell is one of the people who bought a bunch of the stories, and he supplied scans of the originals. And Tommy Burns, who writes for, he does a lot of the intros for the Fantagraphics EC collections. He knows he knows Jim Halperin at Heritage, and he told me who bought the Monster Jar. It was a French fellow named Fred. I'm always afraid of saying his name wrong. Frederico. I'm gonna just look it up so I don't screw it up.
It's okay. I want to know whose idea. Go ahead.
Frederick Manzano.
So he owns most of this, or all of it, or just the burning rights?
He bought the Monster Jar,
and
he has the games that play you. Those were his originals as well. So that's from number 1. So that story was printed from the originals, and the Monster Jar was a mess. It got water damage, got dirty, and he does restorations.
Oh, that's amazing. Okay.
So he restored the hell out of these pages.
Whose decision was it to use? Love this. These 2 pieces as the end.
That was my idea.
Oh, yes, this is awesome. Because when you first open it up, right, like you want to be blown away, and it is this amazing Wrightson piece.
Yep, I love that piece, man.
That is a great piece. Good choice. Good choice. That's
just my favorite. My favorite Wrightson period is late 60s to mid 70s. That's the beautiful Wrightson period for me. I mean, Frankenstein is brilliant stuff. It's amazing, but the warmest and the most fluid stuff in my mind is the stuff from the 60s and the mid up to the Warren stuff he was doing, like the Black Cat and whatnot.
Mm-hmm. I will tell you that freaking Bernie Wrightson's Frankenstein portfolio is still one of my grails. Like, we all talk about grails, right? We all talk about grails on the channel, but that Frankenstein portfolio, big book.
They should do one they should do a book that's just the Wrightson art, everything he did.
Yeah.
In a first edition. I don't need I don't need the novel anymore. I have the novel.
Mm-hmm.
I want just the art.
I don't even know who is it. Dark Horse who published that last?
No, actually a few other companies have put them out, and there was like a 6x9 version came out.
Mm-hmm.
That's not big enough by any means, and there's like a some kind of a limited edition coming out that's going to be like $450. That people are like, I don't know, that's kind of a lot of money.
I mean, we do live in an age where books are. I mean, things just keep going up. So.
150 for like an artist edition is, you can swallow that, but 450.
Yeah, I mean, if you do a limited run, which I'm sure that's the way they would have to do it, that would be the only way to do it. Like, unless they do some kind of crowdfunding.
Well, if they did more, they could charge less if they would have print more. You know.
Yeah, and I think that might be part of the issue, right? It's like, how much do we want to print of this, and is it worth it?
Yeah.
So with something like this, though, let's talk logistics, because I love talking about these kind of things. Something like this is one of these amazing cases and sad cases, unfortunately, that once it goes out of print, odds of something like this coming back to print are, what do you think?
Well, in my conversations with Gary, I'm pretty confident that there'll be a soft cover edition.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. But collectors. So say somebody's watching this interview 5 years from now and they're like, oh my gosh, they're talking about the Web of Horror hardcover. I mean, it happens.
Well, if they sell it, if seeing it sold so well, I think they'll probably be inclined to do. I have no information about a second printing. Somebody tells me probably not, but a paperback edition seems feasible.
I mean, even Dark Horse is like no reprints of the hardcovers of EC or Warren archives.
Really?
That's,
Well, yeah,
that's what they're trying to focus on, are the paperbacks. And
yeah, I was happy to see them start coming out with the paperbacks of the EC and Warren stuff, because I didn't have any of those, because I didn't want to. There's just too many.
well, and there's so much double dipping with them too. Like Eerie and Creepy, like the same story was reprinted, and the archives would do that. They would put the same story in there, and you're like, I just read that. I remember running into that a couple of times when I was going through my read through of Eerie and Creepy. I was like, I think I just read this story. I read it in Creepy a couple of volumes back. It's just a reprint. So that was part of the reasons why they were so padded out. So it makes me happy that this is the complete Web of Horror. What was your favorite story in here that you were like, this is the one I want people to see? This is the one that I think people should know about.
Well, my favorite story out of all of them is the Wrightson story from issue 3 called "Feed It." It seems
issue number 3, right?
It seems like it's almost unique in his catalog of stories, and just the style he drew it in, the amount of attention he put into it, just the look and feel of it seems almost like nothing else he did.
I think it's the final story that's collected before the bonus material. Yeah.
Mike Friedrich wrote it, and it's a cool story. It's just kind of your average Frankenstein story, but kind of like digging up graves and feeding this thing, and not really Frankenstein so much, but the same kind of scenario of grave robbing and feeding something in a cage. And it has a twist ending.
Yeah.
But just the art itself is just beautiful. It's just a sight to behold. And that was from the original art too.
This one was?
Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, look at the here. I'm gonna highlight. This is not gonna do it justice. When I do the,
I love this type with the stairs.
That's what I was gonna point out. Just the amount of detail.
Yeah, it's just
that's mind blowing.
It's gorgeous. It's just brilliant.
The beauty of stories like this, if you like horror, right? It's not for everybody, and I respect that. Although you should definitely enjoy horror. The beauty to it is that they're quick reads, and you can put this down at any time and pick it up at any time, because it's not like one continuing adventure, right, of stories that are interconnected or things like that. That's the beauty of anthologies like this. That's why I love these kind of things. Even the really toned down, like House of Secrets and House of Mysteries from DC Comics. I love anthologies like this. I love just being able to pick up any of these books and say, oh, well, I just want to read it. One of my favorite memories was reading a lot of those Marvel horror comics from the omnibus, the horror and then Horror Lives Again. I couldn't put it down, because even though I could have easily just picked up that omnibus at another time, I wanted to keep reading because I was just so drawn in, because it'd been a while since we had a release of something horror related like that. I think that particular omnibus came at the right time. So when something like this was shown to me, so thank you very much, I was just blown away by how much I enjoyed it. I took it on one of our trips to go see Melanie's mom, and while she drove, I was reading it, and I was like, oh man, this is really good. This is really good. And I had to tell her that you were the part of it. You are the reason this got made. And she's like, Dana, from our Saturday streams? I was like, yes, that's awesome. So yeah, thank you so much for this.
Which story is your favorite? Do you have a favorite out of it?
I do. I was trying to find it. It is. I'm after all these years, I'm still drawn to the these kind of stories.
Oh yeah.
I mean, it's horror, right? But it's more like just give me a good old dude with a sword and try to rescue some chick. You know, that I'm so basic sometimes, but I really enjoy them
Yeah.
because and, you know, when you have a collection like this about zombies or monsters coming to eat you or alien invasions, it's just really cool to see like some kind of barbarian type of character in a deserted world fighting
Yeah.
giant monsters.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, the skin eaters. That's the one. Um, what is in the works next for you? You can't spend the next 10 years working on something else.
No.
Something is cooking, right?
No, the next thing I have going on is scheduled for spring of 25.
Okay. What are we
And
talking about?
I'm doing a book with Dan Klaus,
I
which
like
is
Dan Klaus.
cool. And we're doing a Night Drive was Richard Sala's very first outing. It was self-published,
Mhm.
500 copies, soft cover. And this was back in 83. This came out 84, and it's never been reprinted. So I pitched to Gary. I said, hey, how about I have an idea? Because when Richard passed away in 2020, not from
Yeah.
COVID, but he had a heart attack.
Mhm.
And he and I were really good friends. And Dan and he were really good friends. And I wrote this remembrance piece for a British fanzine called Fanzine about it was this a Richard Sala remembrance article. And so I thought, okay, here's a good idea. What if we do a hardcover edition of Night Drive, and we would include my remembrance piece, which I've rewritten rather substantially. And also, there's an in his own words part about how Night Drive came together, and how it led to a Invisible Hands adaptation on liquid television on
I
MTV.
remember, yeah.
And so that's in there, and Dan's going to write it afterward. But Dan's he's going to design the whole thing.
Oh,
Dan Clouse is going to design the book,
and it hasn't been reprinted since 1983.
No, this is the only printing that there ever was. This was never included in any of his collections. It was just his first outing, and this led to his being in Raw magazine.
Yeah.
And but it's called Night Drive.
So 2025, huh? That's awesome. How far in advance like does the work need to be done, like the articles and the touch up? If there is, I assume there's going to be some scans and maybe some kind of
Well,
like
actually, Gary turned me over to Eric Reynolds, who's in charge of all the Richard Zala stuff at Fantagraphics.
okay.
And so Dan basically, Eric and Dan are working on other Richard Zala projects.
Uh-huh.
But Dan basically volunteered to design this book, and I was thrilled that he would. That kind of completed the circle of the project. And how far in advance? It actually has moved really quickly because I pitched this year.
Mm-hmm.
And when I pitched, when they said yes to Web of Horror, it was like another year before they could put it onto the schedule. But Dan's working on the design as we speak, and they're going to, and Eric is looking at putting it into the spring 25 schedule.
So if you put it into the spring 2025 schedule and it's going to be a hardcover, it's going to have the new designs. My goodness, you may already be looking at your next project then, perhaps.
Yeah, I don't know what that would be, but these things just kind of come naturally. And you just think of them and you go, oh, that'd be nice. That'd be groovy. That'd be cool. But this was like,
what would be? Well, then I have to ask you this, because you have this just immense amount of knowledge of comic book history and fanzines and different creators and where they were. what would be a dream project for somebody like you that grew up with, or you were enamored with the fanzines? Would a collection of fanzines be something that you would ever want? Like, and how would you even collect them?
It's
Anthology?
somebody suggested doing a book that was like the fanzines that led to Web of Horror, and I thought about that, and I thought maybe I'm really not sure how that would come together, because if I don't have a really clear idea about what it's going to be, then I need to have a clear notion of what. I mean, I've thought about other, because there's been a lot of books about fanzines, and there've been other fanzine collections. Like there was a
Mhm.
collection of the complete run of Comic Crusader fanzine. That was a zine from the 60s and 70s.
And that those are definite like fan passion projects. Like
Yeah,
it's a lot of that because a lot of people haven't heard of this stuff. Even with the internet, there really
yeah,
isn't like a huge like amount of people as things like Batman, Superman, X-Men, right? Like but there's this wonderful and beautiful history about underground comics and fanzines that
yeah.
I wonder, if sometimes people look at it and they're like, well, because they're so unique and they're fanzines, there's really no way you could collect them. It's almost like you're losing part of that experience too. Because if you're putting
Well,
them in a collection in a hardcover, then you're kind of losing that thing that made them special in a way.
well, there are books about underground comics that I
Mhm.
don't know that they don't really capture any of what was awesome about underground comics as they were coming out. You buying them in head shops and discovering Corbin and Crumb and Greg Irons and all these different fabulous creators of the underground era. I mean, there's a couple of good. At least I'm thinking of one really good book about undergrounds that doesn't, like I said, like you're saying, it doesn't really capture the
Yeah.
experience. I mean, it's history. The history should be recorded, but I don't know. Like this Web of Horror book was really kind of made itself almost.
I think I definitely think, well, first of all, God bless people like you, because I think you're very important to the existence of a lot of books. Like all the folks at Fantagraphics, and I'm not saying they're the only company that does things like this, right? But they are definitely a company that really puts a lot of these books on the spotlight for people that may or probably. I'll go ahead as far as saying that they probably would have never checked it out unless it's in some nice hardcover collection, unless it's in some nice limited printing collection,
Yeah.
unfortunately. Um, but I think it's wonderful that we have folks like that out there that are championing for things like Web of Horror, a book I had never heard of until you had reached out, and I love it. I love that about this collection. So thank you so much. So I was curious what else is on your plate. So I'm glad that you're already working on the next thing, and then of course get those gears turning about future projects too, because that's really cool. Any other horror type of books you would like to see? Like what's out there that is lost that you would love to see somebody turn up some pages from?
Well, there's still a little bit of Web of Horror stuff out there. I
Oh,
think I think Cluted thinks there's another story of his out there, and there's parts of that Ralph Reese story, Tomb Zero.
mhm.
We have just the title page and we have that big spread, and then we have the last page, and that's
So
all there is.
here's the thing. What's going to happen when they find the original art to issue number 4? That's when the limited edition reprint of this needs to come out with that. That's how it's done.
Well, there's a couple of pieces of art that didn't make it into the book, and I think maybe they could go into the paperback, but then people are like, God damn it.
You would say the same thing too.
I gotta buy another one now just for these 2 pages.
What
I
was
said,
I
yeah.
looking at? I was looking at Dark Horse is releasing the Moonshadow book, and it's the expanded edition. And I was like, oh, that's awesome. I like Moonshadow. It's a paperback and expanded. Oh, it was like
it's criminal. They shouldn't do that.
I would be okay with a hardcover, but I get it. The hardcovers aren't for everybody, and they want to make it more accessible. Obviously, they know what they're doing with the amount of EC and Warren books that are coming out with every month is insane in paperback. The sales must be great.
We're really living there has never been a time like this for collected editions or for comics, and there's more available now than there ever was.
Yeah.
And so
how do you feel about that?
It's like a dream time. It's like
yes.
I mean, I'm glad I can afford to buy some of these things. I mean, it's an expensive time to be buying things. There's a lot of it.
It is, but definitely nostalgia has that price.
But there's just, I mean, like Fantagraphics is doing a lot of various underground reprinting of collections. Like they just did this George Metzger book, and George Metzger, who did Moondog and and whatnot. That stuff that book. I haven't seen much said about it, but it deserves to be. It just came out like a couple of months ago, but this is stuff that, as you were saying, people would never see if it wasn't put together in a book.
What was the name of the book again?
George Metzger. It has a whole title. I don't have it handy, to be honest, but
it's got his name on there. Okay.
It's by Patrick Rosencrantz was the editor of it, and he does a lot of their underground collections at Fantagraphics.
They had sent me a box recently, and one of the other boxes they had sent me got lost. Yeah, it happens. I mean, it doesn't have to be just Fantagraphics. Marvel might. This was the third. Where is it? I can't remember where I put it. The Prelude to the Massacre that's the third copy they sent me. I don't know. Sometimes UPS, somebody ends up with something. Yeah,
that's
I do agree with what you said, though. We are living in an amazing time as far as like accessibility.
Yeah,
with collected editions and comics, and also for digital too. It's insane what people have access to.
Yep.
So I think it's wonderful, and we still need more and more comic curators like yourself to keep putting books out there in people's hands that they probably wouldn't have checked out or even know about. I think that's great.
Well, it was a labor of love, as I said in the book. This was a dream project, and the fact that it's actually I can hold it in my hands now.
Did you cry when you held it in your hands? Did you shed a tear? I would have cried.
I did not cry. No, I didn't. I didn't to do that, but this was like I was really more like, God damn it! And I have to really thank Gary Groth for being. I should have gone to him in the first place, but I gotta say that being turned down by two other. I mean, if Dark Horse or Titan had put it out, it wouldn't have had that lost art in it.
Yeah, you're right. Well, so I'm glad they did then.
So it was destiny, sort of.
Now, really quickly, somebody was asking why is it rated mature?
Why is it?
Yeah, I don't know. Well, it's not on the book, but I was wondering if it was maybe on like the website.
Well, I guess
there's nudity,
but horror, and there's like naked, like scantily clad women. Maybe, who knows?
Yeah, I don't see. But things like this, I don't see as mature. I mean, we're not talking like HBO Tales from the Crypt.
It's not that kind of mature, but
sexual content, right? Like we're talking like a nipple or things like that.
Voice or something. I think it's just because it's horror and it has some scantily clad things.
Well, even the horror elements aren't like graphic horror, right? Like intestines and things like that. It's just like mild violence. Yeah, I don't know, but I get it. Everybody raises their kids different, and maybe they just want to play it safe. I don't see this really as horror and ultra violence. there's a lot of worse stuff being printed out there that don't have a freaking they don't have any kind of label on it as far as what kind of rating it should be.
Yeah.
But I do want to thank you so much for your time, for being here. And when that book comes out next spring, I want you back to talk more a little bit about the history of how it all came together.
I would love to be back on. Absolutely.
Yeah, we didn't even have to wait that long, Dana. We just got to figure out your time because you're all the way in the UK.
Mhm.
And I just want to talk about like just underground comics with you one day. So maybe we should do that sometime. So you don't need what I'm saying is you don't need to have a book to you know. I don't need an excuse to talk to you again because this was a lot of fun. And
Awesome.
the next time I want to see some of these pieces you got back there because I was, no offense, I was looking at those pieces that you had. I'm like, are those original pieces?
That's Bernie Wrightson up there.
Oh, okay, stop it. I'm gonna get jealous.
Right from the City of Others from the back of the story.
So you still own some of that stuff? Then?
Well, I
get rid of all of it.
This is stuff I bought since I moved here. Mostly, I have. Well, not only I brought some stuff over with me, but I bought a lot since I got here.
Well, I love your office. Yeah, so we can we'll get my buddy Taylor Talks Comics, who loves Fantagraphics and underground comics. We'll get him involved, and we'll talk a little bit more about the history of underground comics because I definitely think it needs to be talked about more often.
I would love to. That was my other passion was I discovered fanzines, and then I wanted to publish a fanzine, and then I discovered undergrounds, and then I wanted to do an underground, and I kind of got to do both those things. I didn't publish a fanzine, but I published a Tom Sutton portfolio, the H.P. Lovecraft portfolio by Tom Sutton, Dream Quest of Unknown Kadath portfolio. And I wrote some stories for Dr. Wortham's Comics and Stories, which was a underground comic.
Yeah.
So I got to dabble in those areas.
So you put all these worlds together then, and you got to do that's awesome. And you got this book with your big old bold letter name right there. That's awesome.
I know, it's nice.
That's great. And I want to see more of that. I want to see more of that and other works of people that you admired and you think need to be treated in this particular format. And hopefully there'll be more and more things found too, like archives. Like, well, you never know, right? You never know.
You do never know because people do have things in their collections. And I put out feelers for that monster jar, and Frederick Manzano never saw any of the feelers. I had to get his. I forget if he was told that I was looking for him or I was told who he was and what his email was. I think he was told I was looking for him. Could they give him? Could they give me his email address? Because they weren't just going to hand out people's names. Heritage just doesn't do that. But
right,
but so these things are like I have art here that I'm sure people don't have any clue where it is. I mean, I've had it for like that Cluta piece I've had for 50 years. Let's say 50. Let's say 40.
Okay, let's just say that. Oh man. Well, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for this amazing book. And thank you, for being here. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. And the next time, I definitely want you back to talk about, underground comics. And then when you get your new work up there and published, I guess Fantagraphics is also working on that one, you said?
Yep.
Awesome.
That's right. Well, thank you for having me on. I love Near Mint Condition.
We love you right back.
It's my favorite YouTube comic channel. And it's always your channel is wonderful because it's so positive about comics. There's nothing but not a bunch of negative. There's nothing really negative on your channel.
When people ask my personal opinion about things, I try to use words that aren't "this sucks."
No, I know. I mean, you can have your opinions, but there's a lot of negativity on some of the other comics channels, and it's like, well, why is that a part of anything? It's just dig comics.
I don't know. I think but I mean, I think I learned that from working at comic stores too. I mean, some of the old curmudgeons were always negative about whatever was coming out at the time, and people, it's definitely a case of to each their own. If that's the way you want to be, that's cool. But that's not the way I run things, and I think I'm way past that point in my life where everything sucks, and I never was that edgy to begin with. But thank you so much. I really do appreciate that.
You do a great job.
Well, I appreciate that, and you did a great job putting this wonderful piece together.
Thank you so very much. I appreciate that.
Well, I want you back. So everybody, let's get Dana back. And you all have a wonderful Sunday. I think some of you are Monday, depending on when you're watching this. Thank you all so much for joining us.
Thanks again, Omar.
And go and check out Web of Horror.